and it would be helpful if I put my sound on the video as well. So a lot of things going wrong because of an update that StreamYard did that is messing with literally everything that I'm trying to do here. So apologies for that. We're back with another show and a new co-host because probably no one has ever seen him on the show because he hasn't been here. One of my, I think my oldest followers on Twitter, mutually following each other on Twitter. The reason why he's here is because while I've been interacting with Timothy a lot, I usually come across him on a thread with Cypher, and so that's why I thought it might be fitting to have him as a co-host here today as well. And my other co-host is now trying to get into the screen. Get down. Okay, so Cypher, please do a quick introduction of yourself so people can know who you are. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay. And then we get to our guest, Timothy. Yeah, so I have to explain a little bit. Timothy and we had a conversation a long time ago, and then my hard drive crashed, and I do get it because when you're on Twitter, conversations don't always go down well. So trust might be an issue. That's a thing that happens on both sides. And so Timothy thought that I didn't want to post the conversation for some reason, which I think is not something that you wouldn't be expecting. I'm really happy that we finally got to a point where we could talk about this because yeah, I was sad that I lost the conversation. I lost 4 or 5, I think, in the process when my hard drive crashed. But I'm glad that we can do this over again. So Timothy, for the people who are watching, please do a quick introduction of yourself. Mhm. Timothy, quick interruption because your sound is kind of low. It was I think it was a little bit louder earlier. If you can go into at the bottom of the screen, there's a cogwheel with settings. and you can bump up the sound just a little bit. So
Hold on, let me look at.
And I can hear him just fine. Just in case you know, Tim, I can hear you perfectly. So hopefully it's just something that you can fix quickly.
yeah, I made a small change here as well. So if people in the chat can let us know if they can hear everyone, that would be good. Okay, continue, Timothy. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem. I planned to use my laptop today, which would probably been better, but I had a problem with software using also, so I don't know what happened. But anyway, like I said, I got on Twitter, ended up commenting on some comments somewhere through a Christian I knew, and then all of a sudden, got sucked into some of those threads that exist, and I haven't really looked back. I really enjoy Twitter. I enjoy the format. It's allowed me to meet some really interesting people from all over the world and have some interesting discussions. So it kind of led me here. I also enjoy YouTube a lot, mostly as a consumer. I've been thinking about content creation uh, recently, and so when you reached out recently about it again, I was like, oh, okay, I'll try it, and here I am.
Okay. Well, so yeah, basically when we do these shows, we start off with a single question, which is, what do you believe, and more important, why do you believe it? So um, you're a Christian, as far as I know. So can you expand on that a little bit, and why you're a Christian, and especially the reason why you think Christianity is the true religion?
Sure. I describe myself as a theist, specifically a Christian. Uh, and when people ask me this, there's a lot of reasons why I'm a theist. There's not particularly one argument or one piece of evidence that I favor over any other. It's kind of a cumulative deal. There are a lot of different things that contribute to it. Um, but I could start with the most basic if you want to start there. Did I lose you guys?
I missed
No,
the
not at all. I can
I
hear you.
missed the last part. I was trying to get to chat. So people missed part of because of the audio problem. So I'll do quick recap. So Cypher is one of my oldest followers on Twitter, and I got back in touch with Timothy through Cypher, and that's why he's the co-host today, because I thought that was just fitting. Um, so I
Yeah,
didn't catch the last part. So what convinced you of Christianity? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So what I said is that um, there isn't one particular piece of evidence or argument that I favor over any other. It's kind of a cumulative case of a lot of different things. So I was just asking you, we could start with the most basic one if you want to start there.
Okay. What is the most basic one?
Yeah, I mean, so when people ask me this question, why are you theist? Why do you believe in God? My first, my first reaction is always, why wouldn't I?
Uh, okay. Why wouldn't you? So to me, I have the exact opposite. Why would you? I mean, I found no reason. I read the Bible a couple of times. We're currently doing an entire show on the Bible on Ross channel. Um, I don't see anything convincing coming from the Bible, and as far as I'm concerned, at least, that is the only thing where we can learn about Christianity, because there's no uh, extra biblical things referring to the Christian God, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I mean that's totally fair. And but from my perspective, you consider that, you know, pretty much the vast majority of people who have ever lived accepted that there was a God or a higher power. Still even true today. I know Peter, you live in Holland,
Hmm.
which is probably considered one of the more secular countries in the world.
Yep.
But even so, a little less than half of the people that live in Holland, accept that there is a God or a higher power. And
Um,
of the
about 20% or less
um,
at the moment.
okay, yeah, I mean, I tried to find the most current numbers before. That's the number I came up with was. But anyways, the point is that even of the people that wouldn't associate with a particular religion aren't necessarily atheists. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I know that the idea that some kind of God or higher power exists, and they don't just wouldn't particularly pick a particular religion. And that's true here in the States too. We call them nuns, NONEs,
Hmm.
where they don't ascribe to a particular religion. I know one of the surveys I'm thinking of, the Pew Research surveys, where they had an opportunity to pick a number of various Christian denominations as well as atheist or agnostic, and a lot of them selected none of the above, basically. So that's why they call them nuns. So even so, like today, in our modern day age, it's still true that a large majority of people still accept that there's a God or a higher power.
Hmm.
So when people ask me this question, it's like I would think that most people, even if they don't particularly believe in God or a particular religion, would still be able to understand why I believe in a God.
Okay, so what that part I get, I think, because when we go back in history, people had a lot of things that they couldn't explain, and that is why I think they came up with the concept of a god, because someone uh, had to have made all of this, that the stuff that we're looking at. Um, which I don't think is a convincing explanation, because every single time when science figured something out, we found out that there wasn't a god at the base of this, which is why I think in the modern world, and people who are following what the findings of science are slowly stepping away from this, because the whole God concept, it doesn't explain anything. It is a placeholder for things you do not understand. And so the people in my country who are still believers are, I think, more the fundamentalists, the people who, for the most part, take the Bible literally. Um, think in the 6,000-year-old Earth and creation ex nihilo, a lot of which we've disproven by now. I mean, uh, there's not a lot of truth to be found in the Bible or the Quran, for that matter, or the uh, the Jewish holy books.
So just ask you real quick, Peter.
Yeah,
We
go
hear
ahead.
about Dutch Calvinists. Yeah, are most people in the Netherlands still Dutch Calvinists, or I know there's this division between the southern and the northern part of the Netherlands, where you have the division between the Flemish and the Dutch, the
Yeah,
more French speaking people, and the people who speak
the people in the southern part are, I think that's where most Catholics still reside, because
their
that's
connections with France
yeah,
and Belgium.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So and the Catholic Church is probably the church who's losing the most members, and predominantly because of all the scandals that we've seen with the different abuse um, things
Yeah,
in
which is kind of a
within
worldwide
the.
phenomenon.
Yes, yes, and that,
Yeah.
so in the Netherlands, that is the main reason for people to leave the Catholic Church. Um, Only this week, I've seen in the news 3 churches, Catholic churches, are up for sale because they can no longer maintain them because there's no one coming, and so there's no tithing, and so they can't support the maintenance of the buildings anymore, so they have to sell them.
Mhm.
What we do have now is, because we've got a a big influx of refugees coming from Syria. My best friend is one of those, and so they came with the Syrian Orthodox Church, and I think the what you would call the headquarters or the main patriarch in the Syrian Orthodox Church is they bought a convent just a few kilometers from where I live, so that's the world focus of that church, and they tend to buy up a lot of the churches, and then yeah, they go from Catholic churches to being Syrian Orthodox, and those are people who are still have a strong bond with the church. But I also have to say the whole concept there is completely different from what we see in the Western churches. So they will, for instance, help people financially if they're struggling. Obviously, when they come over to the Netherlands, they don't have an income until they get refugee status. That's when they get at least social security, because then they're not allowed to work for a certain amount of time. But the church will support people like that, so make sure that they've got housing and food and money for all of that. So that is quite different from what I see from the traditional churches that we had here in Holland.
Yeah, which is kind of leads me into something that I was thinking about when both you and just now and Tim were talking about this. So the first thing I have to say is Tim and I have like all these connections that are kind of very interesting. You know, first of all, you know, we both chose these Latin names to be identified by. Yours is what, a cloak of truth?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were talking about how you were in the military before, and that really kind of, you know, expanded your understanding of the world around you because you can meet all these different people. I was in the Coast Guard for 4 years, and kind of had a similar experience with that. You know, I was stationed mainly on the West Coast of the United States, but you know, we had people who were immigrants who joined the military, and you know, it was interesting to see how, you know, some of them who came from different areas actually all went into certain types of ratings. Like a lot of Filipinos were cooks. And it's not a stereotype. It's just that when I went to the training school for cooks, like the majority of the Filipino immigrants who were getting their ratings at that time, that's the place that they chose to basically spend their career in the military. Um, and you know, when I was growing up, so my parents were both Catholic before their teens. You know, that's the culture they grew up in. But by the time both of them were around 13, and they didn't even know each other growing up, they both basically became atheists. My dad much more so than my mom, and so that was the culture that I grew up in. But with my parents, they always were studying religion. Like we had scriptures from pretty much every religion on our bookshelves at home, from you know the Egyptian Book of the Dead to the Bhagavad Gita, and you know the many different versions of the Bible, the Quran, you know all these different you know religious texts. And you know my mother was really big into collecting Native American stories and history, especially when we're living on the West Coast, and there's this very you know because colonization didn't occur there as recently, there's still kind of this real strong connection to that history, especially with the Haida in the Pacific Northwest. Um, but you know, kind of going back to what Peter was just saying, is I think it's interesting that you know, basically, it is you know, and what Richard Dawkins says, it's a meme that you have this culture that you carry with you, and that culture is basically how communities stay together and survive. So, like when he's talking about the Syrian immigrants who are moving into the Netherlands, you know, they're helping each other out because that is their common culture. Is that um, that background that they come from, and when they get to another place, when they emigrate into another place, they will definitely, you know, help each other out. So, you know, nowadays we do have government who does that, and I think that's one reason that, especially in a lot of Western societies, the United States is kind of an outlier of that, and I think we know kind of why in some ways, but or an outlier. You know that you have the government who takes over the role of religion. They're the ones who basically set the social services and make sure that the community is safe and that it is supporting itself. And I think that's kind of the original purpose for religion. It's basically the first kind of forms of government. You set up a state god, and we have this idea that there's got to be some kind of safety net, some kind of way that people can get together, agree on a certain set of norms, ethics or morals or whatever you want to call them, and that's how that gets transmitted. And at some point, when, as Peter brought up, when science comes along, some of those norms you don't need anymore, because they're explained in different ways that don't need some kind of supernatural event to occur. And also, you don't need some of those norms because the government takes over that aspect of people's lives. They are the people who help you out, that make sure that you have the electricity in the roads and the plumbing and everything else that you need to actually have a coherent and cogent society.
Yeah, I'll pick up where you kind of left off there with science and what Peter had already said about it. There's a woman named Elaine Howard Uckland. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right. It's Euckland. She's a professor of sociology over at Rice University, and she did a study where she basically went around, went to a bunch of different scientists, and kind of had an in-depth interview with them, kind of asking them a bunch of questions about their religious beliefs and etc. She put out some papers. She's actually written a few books about it too. I thought were pretty interesting. But she started in the U.S. The first one that she did was in the U.S. only, and then she went worldwide. I don't know if she visited Holland or not, or Netherlands, but she, what she found out was that, typically the scientific population would be slightly, the amount of non-believers, we'll call it, would be slightly higher than the sort of parent population around them. But it was nothing like, all scientists or even most scientists don't believe in God or are atheists. So, this idea that science sort of makes religion or belief in God irrelevant, or disproves it somehow, doesn't really seem to stand up with the actual data that she found. So I'm interested to see what you guys think about that.
No, I actually think that's kind of interesting in some ways. Definitely going to look her up. But one thing that we see in study after study is the fact that when you look at the overall population in a country, what you will find is that the more education a person has, the less likely they are to be religious.
Yeah, I mean, I chose her in my wanderings and stuff and the conversations I have, because she's very serious. I mean, sociology professor, she went very in depth into it, actually interviewed them, so it wasn't like a poll or anything like that. It was very in depth. Her, like I said, she wrote a couple books on it and stuff. So I kind of took that as a pretty authoritative source as far as kind of understanding what scientists really think. And it's the idea that, again, there's kind of a divide between saying that you don't ascribe to a particular religion. Like we were talking about that Pew Research survey earlier. And the funny thing is that if I had taken that survey, I didn't, but if I had, I would have actually been a nun. I would have been none of the above, because the way that the survey was structured, it didn't say Christianity, right? It had all the different denominations of Christianity. And so I currently am, which you might call non-denominational. I don't ascribe to a particular denomination of Christianity. And in fact, that's something that I sort of oppose, is having that division. So, it's kind of interesting. I mean, that's just my opinion. It would have just been me, but still, I would have not been able to select anything in that. And the other thing I liked about that survey was that it had agnostic or atheist as an option. You could have chosen it, and it's a anonymous survey or whatever, so it's not like there was any peer pressure to not answer if they chose to identify as an atheist. So there's a big difference between that, and I think that came out in a lot of what she found out in science, is that if the scientists may not necessarily believe in God or have a particular religion, but they also don't oppose the idea of God. They're not atheists, and and they see the value of religion in a lot of ways that you were just talking about, that religion provides something that science can't. Think about like just the idea of morality. You actually need to tell scientists sometimes, whether something they can do, whether they should do it or not. And scientists need to make that distinction. They need to make that determination that just because I can
If
doesn't mean I should.
if I may jump in that real quick. So I don't think that there's any religion that can provide us with a good morality, and I don't. I also would make the point that if scientists are working on certain things, let's say there's the cloning issue where we have the ability to clone people. Should we or should we not? Um, I don't think that the moral question there is going to be solved by anything within religion, for instance. And I do think that for the most part, any morality that comes from a religion isn't the best. Actually, it is selective when it comes to certain people, especially when you look at the Abrahamic religions. Um, Women aren't equal to men, which to me is a very big problem. Uh, for a lot of parts, they don't have bodily anatomy. Um, so I don't think that uh, would be a thing. And so I don't know if you've seen it recently. Orna had a conversation with a scientist who is very religious and very vocal about her religion, and that's Mary Schweitzer, the woman who discovered the dinosaur soft tissue. And she, in that interview, was very specific, and she will tell her students the moment you're going to do science, you take off your Christian hat and you put on your science hat. Because in science, it is all about the data. Your religion has nothing to do with the work that you're doing in science. You have to set that aside because that is something that you hold to in your personal life, and that shouldn't influence your work because it's going to skew your work if you're going to keep holding on to that. And so, to me,
And
that is, and I think in when it comes to the natural sciences, that is where most scientists will stand, even if they are religious. They will set that aside when doing their work and don't let it influence them. And they might come up with findings.
Robert Baker.
Yeah,
Robert Baker is another good
yeah,
example of
yeah.
that.
He's a Pentecostal
And I was
minister, but
yeah,
also paleontologist. So
just, yeah. And he
there,
says a very similar thing.
yeah.
Kind of getting back to the Pew study as well, that I think is kind of interesting, is that there is still this stigma out there, and there's this misunderstanding of what some of these terms mean, and that's why a lot of people identify as none, is because they don't want to necessarily call themselves an atheist, and they don't understand that agnosticism is not a different thing from atheism. There's
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing is agnostic just means without knowledge, and then you say I'm either a Gnostic or an agnostic theist or atheist.
And
But the thing with the Pew study that I found most interesting in reading it and really looking at it in depth, um, because it didn't just test people's knowledge of Christianity, it tested the knowledge of world religions, and this kind of got back to what I kind of perceived from myself when I read the study is that growing up in an atheist household with all these religious texts around, is the atheist who scored the highest in world religions, and even in Christianity they scored fairly high, not as high as the Mormons and the Jews. Those are the other two highest categories in that survey. Um, but then when you look at those types of Christianity or types of Abrahamic religions, what you find is that those types really put a lot of value in education. And, the people who scored the least, and you see this when you look at another Pew study about the people who accept evolution, you will see that it's the white evangelicals who have the least acceptance of evolution, and it's the mainline Protestants who have the most. And there's a lot of in between there, but and I'm not giving exactly the least and the most, but you kind of get the idea is that it goes kind of back to that idea of education. The more understanding that you get from the world around you, which is especially expanded so greatly recently with the internet and everything else, because we have free access to it, that people start to say, this cultural religion that I brought up in isn't necessarily my theology anymore. And that's why with Jews especially, my wife is a perfect example. She's Jewish, but she's not observant, and she's definitely doesn't consider herself really a theist. She considers herself more kind of an atheist, even though she won't use that word because, again, there's this stigma associated with it because of people's misunderstanding of the word
And
actually means,
if I can jump
and how
in,
other people perceive it.
if I can jump in on that, because as I see a very big difference between the U.S. and the Netherlands. So when you look at the U.S., where the word atheist is associated to probably the worst thing you can be on planet Earth. Atheists are worse than child abusers. That is what people are being taught in church, which would make sense then that if people stop believing, they don't want to call themselves atheists because they automatically get that label put onto them. And in my
because
country,
it's been demonized for so long.
Yeah, in my country, that is not the case. So I think we had a slower conversion, and I don't know why that is, because maybe it's a money issue, because churches in the U.S. have a lot of money, have a lot of influence, and obviously they don't want to let go of that. So they're going to make sure that they support people in government, people who do their bidding, even though you have a separation of church and state. But there's a really big difference. Another thing is that here in the Netherlands, when it comes to having community, that has long shifted from people going to church and finding community there into people finding community in sports, in other kinds of hobbies, things they love to do, in groups where you have shared interests. So all of that has shifted away from a church, which in the U.S., the church is still your main base for your community. I've met several people who lost their faith and literally lost everyone, all of their friends, all of their family, and they're now completely on their own trying to find a new community. And that's something that you don't see here. So,
yeah, that's a fair point. And I mean, the idea that we're still on.
yeah. No clue what
Sorry.
happened.
The idea that some people may not have chosen atheism, or may not want to identify publicly as an atheist. Logically, your argument makes sense, but we only can go by the data, and that's why we're referencing that Pew Research study where they were able to choose it. It was there. It was one of the options, and I think the last one I saw, it was less than 3% of people who did choose it. But to go back, to my original question, why would I not believe in God? This brings up an interesting point, because Cypher was talking about how he sees agnosticism and atheism as being two sides of the same coin, connected. And that's the thing, is it's like a lot of people still, believe in God now, through all human history have, and you have like maybe the loudest, the most active opposition to the idea of theism or religion are atheists, but even they will not claim that there is no God.
It depends.
So,
it depends on who you talk to. First of all, there is no they when it comes to atheists. The atheists are the most diverse group on the planet, and you will be hard pressed to find two atheists who think exactly the same on any given proposal. What I found strange is that the one of the first things you just said is when you look at atheists and Christians within a certain society, you go with the data. Can I ask why you? That is where you go with the data, but when it comes to a religion or a god, you're less likely to go with data. Or if you do,
I think this is a little bit of a loaded question there, Peter.
it
Who
is
says I
it
do?
is because
I've given you.
I'm still curious. What makes you believe in a god? If
Right.
not for any given data that would support a god, and I've looked, and I'm still honest. If you can provide me with any sufficient data that a god exists, then I'll be more than willing to look at that. And if you can convince me, then yes, I'll have to accept that a God exists. But for me, the data points to there not being a God. And it's worse because if I look at the Bible, I'm 100% convinced that that God doesn't exist and can't even exist. So it depends on how you look at things.
Yeah, and I don't ascribe to the Dawkins scales that Cypher mentioned. The idea of but you see the cube all the time on Twitter, right? With the you're describing, somebody who says that claims that there is no God would be agnostic atheist, I guess, something, I don't know. But that's the point, is it's like, okay, you're right. I in my travels and various time, I have met atheists who, in my opinion, are real atheists, and they say that yes, they make the positive claim or proposition that there is no God, and you know, but the mass majority of them that I run into are people who do what you just mentioned, Peter, where it's like, well, I'm not dismissing the possibility. I'm not saying that God does not exist. I personally have not seen sufficient evidence to to change my mind on it or to believe in a God. Which is, it's fine. I mean, we're all entitled to our opinions, but it goes back to my question of why would I not believe? And your the fact that you have not found sufficient evidence or whatever, it's your opinion, but it wouldn't be anything that would influence the way I think or what I believe, just on principle.
And I
Okay,
think
but
using the word God is actually kind of loaded as well. That's why I always used to say deities. I don't say God. I because that has a certain connotation to it, and you can't, when you're verbally expressing your ideas, you can't say lowercase g and capital G all the time. You've got to say, that I don't accept the deities from this specific theology or religion itself, because that deity itself, I don't see enough evidence for it. I've never been exposed to it, maybe, so how can I even know what it means? So we really have to, kind of parse the way that we use that word so that we aren't confusing the capital with the lowercase g. Um, the other, part of this, I think, is the whole fact that Christianity is really, especially with Protestant Reformation, has really lent itself to having these cults of personality, which then become their own religions. I think Mormonism is a perfect example of that. You basically have this whole group of people who are basing their understanding of what the deity is based off of this one person telling them that this is actually how it happened. This is the actual history. It's not those people. It's not those Christians. And you can see this with baptism and Pentecostalism, and we can go down the line of all the different types of Protestant branches of Christianity out there. They all have a certain source. They all have certain ideas and precepts that make them Christian, but they all have also these internal battles between certain theological aspects of why they identify themselves as one group compared to another. Why are you a Lutheran, instead of, some other form of Protestant Christian? And then, within Christianity, you have the three main ones, and there's other offshoots of Christianity. Orthodox, Coptic, and Catholicism, Protestantism. We can go into, again, Mormonism and Rastafarianism. Those are offshoots that have occurred when you have someone who comes along and makes this claim that they have this new revelation, and people start to follow them because they're like, hey, that makes sense to me. And it's not really based off of anything more than kind of feelings and culture. It's the place that they grew up in, and it's what they learn.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It, when you notice when I first started this, that I started out, I told you that I was a theist, specifically a Christian, and I have a lot of brothers and sisters in Christ that I greatly respect that think that the idea of theism, of trying to use reason and logic and philosophy to prove the existence of God is a waste of time for Christians to do. It's not something we should do. We should go straight to Jesus. His life, death, and resurrection, and that's what we've been tasked to do. Spread that good news. We'll go tell the atheists it. We do the best we can to support the New Testament and the testimony there, and if it doesn't work, if the atheist brushes you off, then you just dust your feet off and leave. And I respect that position. I do. I understand why they say that. But for me personally, and the way my mind works, and my life that I spend actively going out and trying to find people who oppose what I believe or believe something different, I think that you start with theism. You start with the concept of God, like you said. If we can't even define what we're talking about here, if you see no difference between God and gods, then we're never going to be able to communicate on what I believe, right? I mean, you take like the God Delusion, the book, and even through that whole book, he used the capital G. He used the theistic concept of God, through the whole book. So I think that it's kind of unreasonable to, or we're not going to be starting in the same place. We're not having the same conversation if we can't even define what we're talking about. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know which one you want to answer.
So I'm
Go
I'm a
ahead, Peter.
I'm a little bit curious now because you said you start off with the concept of a god, of a deity. Why would you
No,
start
the concept of God,
the god?
theism.
Okay,
You know,
but why would you start off with that?
as a that's what I mean as a definition, or as like, how are you going to answer the question, does God exist, if you don't even know what God is?
I agree.
You know what I
I
mean?
agree with
If you
you on
haven't,
that. That is a mistake that a lot of people make, and a lot of shows like this one, where people will just go off of their own knowledge of the Bible or the Quran or whatever, and impose their view of that particular God onto their guest, which is why we try to avoid that and try to have our guest define what they mean when they say God, because it doesn't make any sense to talk for an hour and a half when you're talking past each other when you don't have a shared definition of the word God. And I think it's dishonest, to be fair. I mean, I get the same treatment that a lot of Christians get from atheists, and that is that they will tell me what I believe. That is impossible. My beliefs will be completely different from Cypher's beliefs, and so just ask me what I believe, and I will tell you. And I think atheists should at least give theists the same courtesy, and not trying to fight, uh, uh, let's say, global Christianity when talking to a Christian, because not only are there a lot of denominations, my experience is that even within one single denomination, you will find people who believe different things, who don't share the beliefs with their fellow church members. So I think it's a lot more honest to talk to people and talk to people about their specific beliefs. And the only person who can tell you about those is the person in question. So,
Yeah, and I, I'm absolutely for, the idea of being objective about it,
yeah.
taking sort of personal opinions out of it as much as we can.
Hmm.
So that when we're talking about terms, even between atheist and theist, or different kinds of theists, or any kind of conversation that you can have with anybody, as many of those terms as you can sort of objectively define, the better off you are. I mean, and that's obvious. That's what all academia is built on. That's what science is built on. The idea of defining things in such a way that's objective and has nothing to do with people's personal feelings or beliefs, right? And that's, to me, what theism does. It's philosophy. It's the idea that we're going to take as much of the subjectivity out of it, and we're going to try to define God in an objective way, like through logic and reason. Can we determine whether this being can even be defined, and if he can he exist or not? And that's ultimately what the debate between theism and atheism has been, for most of history, or at least for the last few thousand years. And I understand that it has somewhat changed, maybe since the 80s, maybe earlier. I don't know. But when I'm speaking to atheists about it and they're confused, I ask them to just sort of Google classical theism, you know, the where the concept of God is very clearly defined, um, and as objectively as possible. So we're not talking about a feeling. We're not talking about a simple belief. We're talking about something that has basis in logic, um, in reason. Something that we can kind of all talk about together. A concept that we can discuss objectively.
But then
Uh,
you're asking them to actually um, look at the evidence for your deity from a Christian standpoint, because there are some religions out there, some theisms that are atheistic. They don't necessarily have deity.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's kind of there are three main theistic religions in the world today. You have Judaism, you have Christianity, and you have Islam. Um, and while you could definitely argue that the concept of the deities is different in those three religions, they're a lot more similar than they are different. Um,
But then
but
you're leaving out Hinduism and Buddhism, which are also kind of major religions in the world.
right, and
yes.
they are not typically considered theistic religions. In fact, you could almost say Buddhism, as a practice in some places in the world, is almost atheistic.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up. But Hinduism is definitely theistic. I mean, they've got thousands, if not millions, depending on who you ask.
Right, and that's the difference between sort of the colloquial version, definition of theism, where it just means belief in anything supernatural, versus the idea of the philosophical term theism, which, again, if you wanted to look it up, it'd be probably best to look up classical theism, as far as, for the past few thousand years, the sort of concept that philosophers have been dealing with in as objective a way as possible. So we're not talking about any kind of theism or any kind of belief in supernatural. We're talking about a very specific concept of God. And it's important to kind of start there because again, if we're not, then we're not talking about the same things. Um,
Okay.
And much of that is, the basis for a lot of those theological arguments go back to the Greeks. And, that's a certain theism that we should look at if we're going to be studying classical theism, right? Because, there's a pantheon there that we could talk about. And we could talk about how a lot of the Greek philosophers led to what became, Christianity. I mean, there's this idea that Christianity is just a Hellenization, or I should say, yeah, Christianity is just a Hellenization of Judaism, where they took Hellenistic ideas from the Greeks and they incorporated into um, their euhemerized Christ, which happened in a lot of different places throughout the Middle East. It wasn't just in Judah or Israel that occurred. There's all these other areas where you have a very similarized idea that, these deities that we've been talking about who are up in the sky and don't really interact with people too much in a way that we can observe or test or, interact with, personally, actually become a, a real person on the planet that then scripture is written about, and that's what people start to follow.
Yeah, and I'm gonna break again with some of my fellows apologists and stuff with and particularly Christians, and I'm gonna say that in my opinion, you hear a lot, but there's no faith required to accept that there is a God. And when I say a God, I mean the theistic definition of God as a maximally great being. You might say an absolutely metaphysically ultimate being, right? There can only, by definition, only be one of them, right? And to accept that that God exists, I think you can arrive at him entirely through logic and reason, right? But where I do think faith is required, and where it kind of separates deism from theism, right, is the idea that that God ever cared about us or humans at all, or ever interacted with us at all, or ever did anything on this earth other than create us, right? And that is, the idea of kind of going from deism to theism, I think, does require you to accept, or maybe through faith, the fact that the Bible, um, the specific things that God has done on the earth, that the Bible recorded it accurately, and the faith is that you accept that, not that not that God. Sorry, I got distracted here. Just one second.
No, no worries, no worries. So
So, sorry.
I really want to jump into this because I'm an epistovist and I reject faith completely as being the most dishonest position you can take, because there is no position you could take based on faith. So to me, faith doesn't lead you to any kind of truth. But why would you use faith in order to come to a position that you think is true?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is that a lot of Christians, a lot of apologists make the concession to the atheist that you have to have faith to believe in God. You just have to have faith. You just have to, you know, and I don't hold to that. I don't believe that's true at all. I think that the fact that most people who've ever existed accepted that there was a God, the fact that you can get there through logic and reason, to at least to the idea of God existing. And
Okay,
when you say that you have to have faith in God, it's not faith in God's existence. It's
and
not faith
and
in whether
now
he exists or not. It's faith that he
now I'm
does.
curious.
Just one second. Just
Yeah,
one
okay.
second, Peter. Let me finish my thought. It's the faith in the idea that he will do what he said he was going to do, right? That the faith in is in believing what the tradition that's been passed down through the Bible is correct,
Okay.
right? So it's not faith in God; it says in the faith to believe, to accept he exists. I don't think the faith is required for that.
Okay, so how do you get to a God using logic and reason?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Is you know you start out with the idea that God is God a necessary being. You know, we're talking already about objectivity. The idea of trying to, in our conversations, in our debates, in our science, and then in academia, we're always seeking to be objective. We're trying to base our processes and our conclusions on the evidence, without any feelings, involved and such like that. But that's the idea of an objective standard. We all have, and we all know that, there are things that are true and there are things that are false. There are things that are right, there are things that are wrong. There's things that exist and things that don't exist. We all are having these conversations all the time, right? You have billions of people on the earth, always, all kind of, you imagine it's like a bunch of railways, right? We're all zigzagging all over the place, going all our different ways, right? From billions of people, that's happening, and all the time we're coming to these places where we meet, right? Sometimes we crash, but a lot of times we meet. And sometimes when we disagree, or we all know that even though we're all living our own lives, right, and we're all doing what we're doing, that when two people come together and there's a disagreement, right, we believe in the possibility that one of us is right, right? We have all these court cases, we have all these, disagreements going on all the time, billions and billions of them every second. And we're all able to survive. We're all able to exist together somewhat in societies and all this in the world because of the idea that we believe that there is a right and a wrong. There is something objective to to all of our lives, even though we all live our subjective ones. We believe this. So
There I disagree.
you take that.
There I disagree. So when it comes to morality, morality is an evolving concept, and morality is entirely subjective, and we do have shared morality within a certain society, which is also different in different countries on the world, because I would say that morality in the U.S. is completely different. The social morality is different in the U.S. than it is in the Netherlands. And I also want to say that you said that we have this thing where if two people disagree, then one of the two has to be right. No, that's not the case either. They could both be wrong, and there could be another solution to the problem that you differ on. So
Sure,
and
and
I think
go ahead.
I was just about to say, I think the United States is actually a very good way to look at that. Because we have this great experiment going on where we are a federal republic, in that we agree to be all part of one government that has a certain set of regulations that we place on everyone, but then each state has a way to tweak those regulations and to have even down to a local community level ways to tweak them as well. And I think what you see in the United States, and I've put this data table up on Twitter before, where you will see that states that have more theism also have more social ills going on, whether it be a higher murder rate, higher teenage pregnancy rates, more people incarcerated. And it correlates pretty nicely with the number of theists that are in each state. The states that have basically a better have less of these social dysfunctionality have less theism. There's another study out there that I can put on the Twitter page as well for people to look up, but it shows it among Western cultures. Do you find the same thing? Western cultures that have a greater number of theists in their culture have more of these socially dysfunctional things occurring in their nations. So there is kind of a way to test that, and you could say, is that causation or correlation, or does it really happen that way? Well, if we dig down to the data enough, you could probably find out it does, because you have these states that have a lot of theists in them, and they limit sex education in the classrooms, and then they have more teenage pregnancies, and they have more sexually transmitted diseases, and so on. Because you're basically limiting, the human nature with this cultural concept that doesn't really fit into our modern society anymore. And it gets to, I hate to use morality as well. I'd rather use ethics, because you do have this source of ethics from reciprocal altruism through evolutionary biology. Basically, why do humans and animals, in fact, it's not just humans who do this, but why do you have these social creatures that take care of members of their society that could be a detriment, or are not reproductively active? It's the whole grandma hypothesis, or homosexuals. Why are they still around? Why do they continue within the population? Well, it's because they actually serve a function for those who are capable of reproduction. They don't take away from the society; they actually add to it. And, kind of getting back to what I was saying before with, governments basically becoming the replacement for religion, when you start to take away, or when you start to provide things that religion once provided, then the religion is no longer necessary. And that's why it starts to die off. And you do see a correlation with certain states, the United States, and certain Western cultures, where the more support that the actual government gives, the less need for religion there is, and religion starts to decline because people don't see a need for it anymore, because their needs are being met without all of these restrictions and taboos and other things that are placed there by religion.
Yeah, I want to go back real quick to what Peter said, and you're absolutely right, Peter, when you said that we don't both necessarily aren't not both going to be right or wrong. There are definitely other logical options to that, and you're exactly right about that. And my answer to kind of both of you and what you're saying is that I'm not going to sit here and say that we're going to disagree about what's right or wrong. I mean, there's no doubt about that, right? And people are going to have different standards. There's going to be different cultures, and all these rules are going to be a little bit different, right? But it's not that we're agreeing on exactly what is right or wrong. It's that we agree that there is a right or wrong. So one culture thinks this is right, the other one thinks it's wrong. We disagree, but we do agree that it's possible for right or wrong to exist. Do you understand the distinction there?
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's going to be disagreement on it, but what we always agree on is that it is possible for one of us to be right. We believe that we are right, and that being right is possible, right? And that's the idea
And
of that.
what
Wow,
I was
there are a lot of
saying when it comes to that is that the right and the wrong are not fixed. They change over time. I mean, the easiest thing to go to is same-sex marriage. That was wrong for a long, long time, and we finally figured out that people who are gay should be entitled to marry the person they love, and that has nothing to do with sex or gender. So we're now slowly across the world accepting the fact that we can have people that have the exact same rights. It doesn't harm anyone. I still see that as an argument that, especially in the U.S. by fundamentalist Christians, that if you allow same-sex marriage, then yeah, we're going to go down and we'll all become pedophiles. Well, that's not how things work. That's not true at all. There's no data to support any of that. It is that we're actually giving people the same right that most of us have had for centuries, if not millennia. And so that is a shift of what is right and what is wrong. At the moment, we see the whole thing with trans people, for instance. And for a tiny part, I get that, because a lot of people do not understand what it is to be trans, and so they might be afraid, and they might be thinking that this is a choice they make at some point. Someone decides, I was a man and now I want to be a woman. That is not how it works. This is something that they've been fighting with for their entire life, and I can't put myself in that position, and even try to comprehend what is going on in the minds of people like that. But I do know one thing, and that is they're human, and they should have the exact same rights everyone else on the planet has. The fact that I get to have long hair, have a mustache, and a goatee, because that is how I feel I should express myself to the rest of the world, is not that dissimilar of someone who feels that they are in the wrong body and they would really like, especially when science can do a lot of it, to get where they are in a body that is at least for them acceptable to live their life, and they should have the same rights everyone else has. I mean, it's no problem for a woman to get a breast enlargement or a breast reduction. Why should it be a problem for people who are transsexual if they want to change their body to have their body express more who they feel they are? And that is a thing that is now ongoing, and that is still a hot topic in pretty much every Western country. We recently saw the UK block a law made in Scotland, and now the Scottish people are looking into the fact whether or not they can separate from the United Kingdom just because of that, because they don't want people to intrude on the laws that they make based on what their society thinks at that particular moment. It is a shifting paradigm. It always will be. We're still learning. Every single day we're learning, and every single day we get new data on pretty much everything. And the same thing is now happening with the question on sex and gender. I'm will fight for those people to have the exact same rights that anyone else has, because why shouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, you just made, those are great arguments, man. You've just made the arguments of something that you think, that there's a lot of disagreement about right now as we're sitting here, and you think there's a right answer, and you think that your answer is correct, and you gave reasons why you think it's correct, right? And morality is just one example, right? We keep talking about science, and Cypher was talking about testing, right? Things that we should be able to test. Well, the entire concept of testing something in science carries the presupposition that it's going to be repeatable. It's going to make sense. Like if I do this once and it works, and I do it again and it works, and I do it again and it works, well, now we can say that test passed, or that test succeeded, that experiment worked, right? We use it in logic all the time. We use logic everywhere in science, and philosophy, and everything else. The idea that if something makes logical sense, there's a very good probability that that's going to be you could apply that in the real world and it will work.
But
It will succeed.
Now you're conflating two separate things: logic and science. Science is, as far as we know, the only method that gets us correct results when it comes to explaining the world we see around us. It's the only method currently known to give us those answers. When it comes to logic, logic is just a language we devised to explain what we see around us. And the fact that we can trust logic is because it keeps giving us good results. It keeps giving us the results we can confirm.
Absolutely.
And pretty much the same thing goes for science. But I still want to go back, because one thing that you've constantly avoided during the entire talk, and I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but you still haven't told us why we should believe in a God, why we should even consider the proposition when there's no data leading to it. You said you can come to a God through logic and reasoning. And I'm really curious how you would get to a God through logic and reasoning, because for me, that has always been impossible.
Yeah, and I mean, we were kind of getting there, but it's the idea of, or one of the ways that you can get there. And I told you from the beginning that there isn't one particular argument, but one of the ways is the idea of objectivity, of the fact that this reality exists in something. The order, the idea that we can test things, the idea that logic works, the fact that science works, the fact that mathematics can describe reality in such a precise way. All of these are based on something, right? And so when you're talking about, what would it be based on? You just ask that question. What could we, just using logic and reason alone, what could we um, sort of infer this this basis would be? What would it look like? What is, what could possibly be big enough to be an objective standard, not only for us and the billions of people that are running around in this world right now, but for the laws of physics in this universe itself? What could be big enough? And I think that that's the idea. We're kind of combining a bunch of different arguments here, but the idea of objective morality, the idea of the objectiveness of logic and reason itself, all of these have to be based on something. And so
Why?
you just take that.
Why would they? Why would they need to be based on something? I mean, in science, science is based on certain axioms um, that we presuppose, and we only hold on to those because they keep giving us the correct results. When you say the laws of physics, the laws of physics aren't set. If we look at the Big Bang model, when we get to Planck time, that's where the laws of physics that we know of break down. And the laws of physics, they are descriptive. All the laws of physics are man-made. They're descriptive. They're describing what we see around us. It is not that there was a lawgiver who made these laws and now everything has to conform to that, because that's not the case. And it's the same thing with logic. There are different sets of logic. There's Boolean logic that is used in computers, which is completely different than the three laws of logic that we use in daily life to confirm whether or not something is what it is and it can be what it isn't. So those are just our ways of describing the world and the universe as we see it. They're not laws as in human-made laws where there is a lawgiver who will write down the laws and now everything has to adhere to those laws. That's not how it works. There are different laws of physics, even within what we can see of the universe.
And in science, laws are pretty much always mathematical equations.
Yes.
It's kind of like the idea, it's just a theory. Well, in science, theories explain facts, and facts are observations that we make.
Yep.
And hypotheses are ways that we formulate a question to test to see what the results are, to see if we can disprove our hypothesis.
Yeah, it's one of the
this
things.
Is kind of getting to semantics.
It's one of the things that annoys me most is that in science they use the word theory, which has a colloquial usage as well, and then it opens up for people to conflate the two. They're completely different. So scientific theory describes facts, measurements, tests, hypotheses, and explains how these things work. That is a scientific theory.
That's why I brought up law.
Yeah,
that's why I brought up law, because in science, laws are pretty much purely mathematical equations that explain some fact that we observe, or that not explain it, but actually give us a testable way to use that law.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you guys are right, but at the same time, science works, logic works, reason works, right? And you guys talking about, like, with my original question of why would I not believe in God, and you say, well, science has sort of replaced the need for him. People throughout all of history have relied on religion to explain things they didn't understand, and now, science is starting to fill that gap.
Okay.
So now we need God less.
I have to clarify. I have to clarify part of that, because when I say science replaced God, that's not entirely true, because there are more reasons that for people to believe in a certain God than just explaining the world around us. I mean, most religions will have an afterlife, which is just the human desire to continue after you're dead, or maybe seeing your relatives who have passed on again. So that's another reason. That's something that science will never replace. So if I said
Yeah.
it
All right.
replaced, or if it came across like that, that's not exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. I understand that. I was trying to say the specific thing, what
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about now, which was, the idea that science has replaced, at least in some part, some of the knowledge that people relied on religion for before, right? But then we looked at the fact that, there are still a lot of scientists, that still accept that there is a God, or at least see value in religion, through
Mm-hmm.
morality or something else, right?
Yeah.
And so, uh, you know, it, it's I think that like in the definitely in like the late 18th century and early 19th century, when after sort of the knowledge really started to become, more popular and science really started to get going, I think a lot of people expected to find that, when we start to look at things and the way that they are made, we start like, really digging down into reality, using this new method, that we would find that everything was sort of simpler as it got smaller, right? Or as we broke down the laws of physics and we started to really understand the way that particles interact, and we started to know what an atom is, we started to made the assumption that it was going to become simpler and simpler as we learned more. But what's really happening, you talked about plate time earlier, what's really happening is that we're finding out the more we find out, the more we don't know. We expected things to get simpler as we learn more, but they're getting more and more complicated. When you're talking about like the Planck time back to the Big Bang, it's a singularity. It's a place in space and time, or point in space and time that's smaller than an atom, contains the potential energy of an entire universe, right? And we don't know where to go from there. We have no idea where to go from there, because nothing that we know about reality makes any sense for all
It
that
depends. It
potential
depends
energy
on
and mass to be.
it depends on how you look at it. Because if you really want to go there, I mean, everything started out as energy, and matter is just slowed down energy. So how much space would energy take up? If you ask yourself that question, it is a lot easier to explain what currently is the Big Bang model, and the fact that even if you look at it, the total energy count of the universe as we currently understand it is zero.
The net is zero, yeah.
Yes. So the I'm not saying that I fully understand it. I had a brief conversation, and I was producing the conversation that Orna had with Sean Carroll, and a lot of that went just straight out over my head, because when you're looking at theoretical physics, a lot of that is so counterintuitive, and you have to spend time in learning what they're talking about and how things work. But it is the model that we currently have. There's at the moment there's a shift where people say that the current Big Bang model isn't explaining everything correctly, and they're slowly walking away from that. Sean Carroll is one of the theoretical physicists who came up with a slightly different model and is still working on that. And that, to me, that's a good thing, because science isn't closing doors. It is everything that science explains is provisional. It can be changed when new evidence comes in, which to me makes it a far better explanation than any God could ever be, because the God, it stops with a God. And the moment you stop investigating, then you've got a problem. You shouldn't stop.
And
Yeah.
we can't just rely on a God of the gap. That's the whole, that's the whole point there, right?
Mhm.
Is that we can't say, oh, we can't explain this part of it, so all of a sudden that's where a deity comes in and does something supernatural that we can never understand. because that stops all inquiry. So, using the God of Gaps idea that, the Discovery Institute brought up with evolution. Oh, we don't understand how certain parts of cellular mechanisms work. So that's where we insert the deity. You just can't do that because it actually stops inquiry and it limits our understanding of the world.
Sure, but I mean, take like something that everybody believed at one point in time that turned out to be wrong as science progressed. Like say, the flat Earth. Okay, my battery's dying. The idea that the Earth was flat. Pretty much everybody believed it. They had no reason not to believe it, right? As knowledge progressed, people started asking questions. First, we proved mathematically that it's not flat, and then eventually through literal pictures of videos, it's not flat, right? Science found absolutely irrefutable reasons for people to not believe the Earth is flat. Now, of course, they still do, or they say they do. But that aside, science definitely proved that, right? The idea that the sun rotates around the Earth. Again, everybody believed that. It looks like it does. Why would they think otherwise? Well, again, through mathematics and other things, we started to discover, well, no, it doesn't. And not only, then we find out that not only is the Earth rotating around the sun, but the sun is also rotating around its own axis of the universe. And all these things that we ended up finding out. And there are all of these examples of that happening in human history, right? But
Oh,
you say God of the Gaps, but the
we,
problem with the God of the Gaps, calling it God of the Gaps, is that's not happened for theism. That has not happened for belief in God, I don't think yet. That sort of moment where,
okay,
okay, this is
okay.
absolutely not
Let me
necessary explanation anymore. It's not happened yet.
let me segue off of this a little because you mentioned a few things. I could throw in a third, and we might have a disagreement. We know for a fact, and this is something that all three major religions accept as being true. We know for a fact that the global flood never happened. We have all the evidence we need that that is entirely impossible. For one, there's not enough water on the planet to cover everything, but every single sign we see, whether it be in the evolution of animals or whether it be in geology, it is entirely impossible for that to have ever happened because there's no evidence for it. And better yet, we have evidence against it. We have civilizations that have recorded their civilization from before and after the flood. So what happened? Would everyone drowned, and then after the flood, those civilizations were started back up again and just took off where the other ones were drowned left off? It's impossible. There are civilizations
And I think,
that don't even mention the flood. Yet, even if you look in the U.S., a lot of people think that that is still a fact.
and
So,
and to kind of expand upon your point, Peter, I think
mhm.
what this all comes down to is that um, Christianity, if we're going to take what Tim is saying here, Christianity holds that the Bible is the Word of God, that it is a literal truth. At least some
Mhm.
theologies in Christianity say that. So when you're saying that, we have this deity that has somehow explained itself to us through Scripture, and then we have this point that comes up, the Usher chronology says that the Noachian flood happened, about 6,000 years ago. I'm sorry, about 4,000 years ago, a little bit longer than 4,000 years ago. Are we then to say that, that is actually not historical? And why was it written as if it was historical if it wasn't? If we're going to say that it's an analogy, what is it, an analogy to? What is it trying to explain to us? If this is, some kind of lesson, if the scripture is some kind of lesson that we're trying to um, understand our lives through, then why would it be portrayed as being historical, and why would other people say that it's just an allegory about the way that we live our lives? What is the purpose in that?
Yeah, so that kind of plays into a point. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and go off on a a debate about Noah's flood at this point, but you guys, that's what's wrong. Kind of my point is that all the science and reason and the things that we have discovered up till right now, as we're sitting here, you know, yeah, you have a good argument. You have a decent amount of evidence against a truly literal interpretation of the first two chapters of Genesis, right? And I guess, you could say that you throw the flood in there, right? That's a long, long, long way from saying that, science has in any way disproved the existence of a God or the need of a religion, right? You say it's God of the gaps, but that's not a gap, man. I mean, there are not gaps in knowledge. We have this little bit of knowledge, right? Which you're stating as 100% fact, which I think is a little bit, might be a little too much to say it's 100% fact, but still, you have a little bit of knowledge that you think that you're applying to a very specific part of the Bible, right? But that leaves that's not even touching the rest of the Bible, and that's not even touching theism at all. And when I went back to before is the idea that the predictions that we made back when this all started was that, like, DNA. You mentioned DNA earlier. We thought that once we got down to DNA and we started to see how the body works and all the biological reproduction processes happen and stuff, that it was going to be something very kind of simple building blocks that just built on each other, right? And then even as early as the 80s, they said like 92% of our DNA was junk, and now they're looking back like, oh well, it's more like 90%, maybe 85, because they're starting to realize that they just didn't know what it did, right? And then the DNA itself, like, we are not finding that things that as they get more basic that they're simpler, they're getting more and more complex, like amazingly complex. Like, I don't know, I'm sure you see it. You see, you're a teacher and stuff. You see it, you keep up with the science, and I love it. I mean, I love reading about this stuff. And like you said, Peter, I don't understand a lot of it, but a lot of it, you can understand, especially if you apply a little bit of time to it. I mean, we're talking about like string theory. String theory proposes that there's 11 dimensions. Now, it's not 11 dimensions like bigger than space or outside the universe. This is 11 dimensions down, like smaller than an atom. Like things that, we think that it was going to be a funnel, right? We thought that the universe would start here and it would kind of, we would learn and learn and learn, and it would all come down to a small building block, right? And we would be able to start there and kind of recreate everything. But what it ended up being was more like an hourglass. It goes big, kind of to us, right, where we are in this kind of reality that we observe, and then down the other way, it just spreads out again. Like there's as much into the sort of microscopic, subatomic, quantum level as there is to the, galaxy, universe, whatever else level, right? And so the prediction that science was going to just eliminate the need for God because we'd eventually be able to explain things, I think is backfiring. I think it's going the opposite way. That prediction failed, and that the more that we learn about this world and the more that we learn about this universe and this reality, the more questions we have, the more we realize that we don't really know very much, man. I mean, we still have a lot to learn.
I agree
And
with you
so
that we don't know everything yet. We have no clue of figuring out if we know much or if we just know a little bit. But to me, one of the things that stands out is that literally everything in the Bible that describes our world, we have now confirmed is wrong. It doesn't matter where you... special creation, where kinds are created separately, we know that's wrong. The fact that Moses split the sea, okay, if God exists, probably he could do that. Within physics, that's impossible. The flood never happened. The way it describes the earth having a firmament, a closed firmament with water outside, we know that is incorrect. We know the earth doesn't rest on pillars, which the Bible describes. That is incorrect. The Bible describes that there's a mountain, and I think there's also a verse that refers to a tree tall enough to from where you can see all the kingdoms on earth. Even if we are settling to the kingdoms at that time, that was impossible. So everything the Bible tries to do to explain the world around us, we've now confirmed is wrong. If the Bible is the word of God, why would he put in so many wrong things if he apparently created it and knows what the real deal is. That
And it sounds like what Tim is getting at here is something that Stephen Jay Gould coined as NOMA, non-lapping magisteria. So basically, that let's see, another way to put it is, and I can't remember who said this, that the Bible explains basically not how the heavens were made, but how to go to heaven. That's the idea, that you have these two fields and they shouldn't overlap because they're not trying to explain the same thing. So we shouldn't probably confuse the two of them. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Tim, but I think maybe that's what you're getting at, is that, there's all of these things out there that, yeah, we are never going to have an understanding of. I mean, we're never going to learn everything. Einstein said that our knowledge is basically like a growing sphere in an infinite amount of darkness. And for every question we answer, that sphere grows, but the outer part of the sphere just gets larger and gives us more questions that we have to answer. But we're not going to answer those questions with a deity. I think that's kind of the main point here, is that they're not supposed to be answered with the deity. We can't say, we don't understand, therefore a deity did it, a deity of the gaps, a god of the gaps. Instead, we should ask ourselves, well, what questions can we actually ask, and what evidence can we present to test our ideas about how the natural world works? And we shouldn't stop at one point and say, well, it's come to this point where we don't understand it, and so we should just run away from it and say that something supernatural happened. But kind of getting back to this idea of theism, is that we also shouldn't say that science is going to disprove a deity, because that's not what it's about. It says nothing about the existence or non-existence of deities. It can't say anything about that, because that is what theology is.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. A lot of the things that Steve mentioned were not what the Bible says necessarily, right? They were the way that people interpreted what the Bible said. So like the idea of the pillars or the firmament, you always go back to that old drawing that some monk did back in wherever,
no.
that showed that the earth was,
No,
but
no,
the idea is that
for that, no, sorry, I have to explain. For that, I'm going to the Bible and just reading what it says, and it does say the earth
And Peter, wait a second.
right, but
rests
that
on
picture
pillar.
was not in the Bible, right?
The picture isn't in the
And
Bible.
Peter,
That's always good.
But I didn't mention a
the thing
picture.
that we have to remember about this, though, the thing that we have to remember about that picture that everyone shows in the Bible verses that it's based off of, is we also have to remember that that did not exist in Jewish culture, in the culture of the Hebrews before the Babylonian exile. It was co-opted from a completely different religion, and many people use that idea beyond even the origin, or even beyond the existence of the Hebrew culture. That was their concept of what the world was like, because they didn't think they could go beyond their certain country or whatever, because all of a sudden it stopped, and it could have been the oceans, it could have been mountain ranges, it could have been some impassable, place that they couldn't go past. They're like, oh, it stops there. And they explained it by saying, well, why are the stars constantly moving and they're always in a fixed area? And why do we have these wanderers, which is the Greek name for planets? Why do they roll across it? Well, it must be because there's this solid thing that the stars are painted on, and the planets and the sun roll across that thing, getting to the heliocentrism and geocentrism idea. It was, the Copernican revolution, really explained by Galileo, that kind of pointed out it's not scripture that is a way for us to understand what's happening out there. We've got to look at natural ways that these things can occur and explain them with theories, test them with, make a hypothesis, and actually make some mathematical laws to explain the movements. So, we shouldn't also, say that it somehow is based off of one religion or another. We should also understand that, religions evolve over time. They change over time. Protestant Reformation again, the origin of Mormonism, and other things that have spurned off of different sects in Christianity. there's ways to explain, and that's what we should be looking for. We should be looking for how to explain the world around us, and we should not confuse it with a cultural reference, theological, interpretations of, how the heavens were made or how to get to heaven. No, they're two totally separate things, and we should understand where those ideas came from. And I think that's what's important. It's important to know our history and to know, that these religions have constantly borrowed from one another, and that certain religions have, come out of other religions. They've evolved from other religions as a cultural mean to explain the world in a different way. And that's why you have these splits in religion. That's why you have these new religions. They're trying to explain things in a new way that makes sense better with our technological understanding.
Yeah, and I agree. And I mean, you were exactly right when you said that the book, Bible's not a science book, But my point was is that the idea that, our knowledge, as our knowledge grows of the universe, and as science finds out these things and these principles, and then we go back and we read the Bible and it says something, and we're like, well, maybe it was interpreted one way 1,000 years ago. Maybe it needed a little update. Maybe it needed, maybe we weren't quite understanding it. So it's a little kind of, it's not that surprising to know that the interpretations of the Bible have changed throughout new knowledge that we gain, and it will undoubtedly continue to change as we gain other knowledge. Things will make a lot more sense. But the idea that, yeah, I mean, we're using science to answer these questions, right? But science, we've already said, science is not a theistic or atheistic thing in and of itself, right? It's just science. Either one can use it, right? And so, I don't know.
Oops. I think we lost Timothy. He did say earlier that his battery was dying. Okay, he seems to be back. Are you back, Tim?
Yeah, I am. My battery is dying, so we probably should wrap this up. But,
yeah, well, we have been going past the hour and a half mark, which I usually set up. That we're going to.
Dang, it's been that long already?
Keep it, yeah. Well, it was a fun conversation. I'm hoping that at least you got the idea that now confirmation that I didn't ditch the conversation that I had with you earlier, because I think that one was, I think, as good as this one. Even though we didn't have Cypher here.
All right, Peter, I forgive you.
So, but
I forgive you.
No,
I won't hold it against you anymore.
It was a good conversation.
It was a good, when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, it was a good conversation. I do have one question, and I'm not entirely sure if I understand it correctly, and it could be a little bit facetious, but I offered people in chat to come up with questions, so I'm going to ask this one. This is from GeoSam for you, Timothy, and he says, if God will return and if he's omnipresent, where will he be returning from? And I'm thinking that he's more or less going to the fact where Jesus will return. Jesus is God, and God is omnipresent. It's
that's
it's
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what he's referring to. I think it's possibly the idea that Jesus.
It's a problem. I think that we get with the omnis that are attributed to the Christian God, and I'm not even sure if you accept all of them: omnipresence, omnipotence, and omnibenevolence. Because if we were to go there, then we've got a problem already, because they're mutually exclusive. That God cannot exist. It's impossible. But
yeah, and I mean that goes back to the definition of classical theism that we talked about. Those are typically included in classical theism, and that would be definitely an interesting conversation to have later. Appreciate the comment, Sam. And I mean, the idea that I think that Jesus returning is, the confusion there is the fact that he took a physical form. Jesus took a physical form here on earth and left, and will come back. So physically come back, I guess, is what it would mean. So
okay.
But yeah, man, I hope we can do this again, and
I,
It's a
I,
lot. It's a lot
yeah,
to talk about, and I think we did a pretty good job.
I think so too. And for people who tune in for the first time, we have this set format where we invite a guest on, and they have a setting where we always have two hosts. So Pfeiffer was my co-host for the day. When a guest comes on and like the conversation that we had, we offer the guest a second conversation where they get to decide the topic, and they do not tell the hosts until we are live what the topic is going to be. Because, and this is the reason for that is because the guests we invite here are usually people that I meet on Twitter or somewhere else, and they are not used to talking in a live conversation on YouTube. So there's no way for them to prepare for any of this. And in order to keep things equal, this is why I came up with the idea. So if a guest comes back, they can decide on the topic, and they tell us the moment we go live, so we cannot prepare for it. So we will still have some kind of an equal footing. And we've had a few Christians who have come back with another topic, and I really enjoyed those, because then the tables are turned, and the guest gets to ask us questions, and we have to stand up for our position, and which doesn't happen a lot. It always seems to be the other way around, where we try to ask theists to defend theirs. So I'm really hoping, Tim, that you'll come up with a good topic to grill the both of us. And Cypher, I think you would be more than willing to come back for that one, right?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, it was extremely enjoyable. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And I do have something in mind for you guys. If you would like to do it again, it's going to take me a little bit to prepare.
No worries.
It's actually based on a book that I read many times, but I probably should read it one more time to do something like that and kind of prepare it for you guys. And I think you'll have fun with it.
Okay. Well, Tim, thanks for joining us. I do think that this is a lot more productive than the back and forth we have at times on Twitter, because for some reason that always keeps going towards hostility, and I try to have it not go that way. It's probably you've got a limited amount of characters to use, and one of the things that humans have is that their own mindset at the time will be how they interpret what you just typed, and I base that off of my own experience. If I'm grumpy and I see a tweet, I will interpret it completely different than when I just had a great day and see the exact same tweet. So it's probably just a human thing, and we should.
Well, we all know it. You know, people say things to you on Twitter that they would never say to your face, even
exactly,
on YouTube,
exactly, exactly. Although we do a show every 2 weeks on Discord, and I really should start streaming those to my channel, where we just invite people and have them try and convince us that a God exists. And so, yeah, people do say things to your face, although that is without video. So maybe that's the other thing. But yeah, people have said some terrible things to my face, even on camera. But it happens. I mean, I can't say that I wasn't guilty of that. When I started out this channel, the conversations that happened back then are completely different from now. I've learned, and I've tried to be more cordial and more respectful to the guests that I have, even if we had and this will surprise you, we had the wife of God on our channel, we had Jesus on our channel, and I'm trying to get Jesus, which is another guy, which is weird, back on the channel, because we have a Jesus here in the Netherlands as well. a guy who's convinced that he's Jesus and he has come back and he wrote an entire new Bible, which people don't know about. So I think that would be a good conversation. But the guy that I talked to, the guy, a close to 60-year-old guy, who claimed to be the wife of God, who convinced a young boy under 18 that he was Jesus. To me, that's a form of child abuse. And that was a guy that I didn't like very much, but we still try and have a decent conversation with people like that. Although that is where I really, really have to
you need a block button?
Control myself. I haven't blocked him, so he's not blocked on Twitter. He's not blocked. He is blocked on the channel because he kept spouting insults towards people who wrote in the comments, and that is something I at some point you're going to go too far. Usually I leave things up unless there are physical threats, but this guy just started following people everywhere. He's proud of having 2,000 restraining orders taken out against him. I'm not kidding. He showed me the binders and went through them. So this was a weird one. But I'm glad we had a good conversation. So yeah, we'll close it up right here. If people want to know what I'm doing tomorrow, go check out Randolph Richardson's channel. That's Randolph with an F, Richardson, and you'll be able to find that on YouTube. And we're going to spend about 6 hours talking about whether or not a God exists. And after that, obviously, I'm back on Ross' channel producing Reading Joseph's Myth, where we go through the entire Book of Mormon, which is also a lot of fun to do. Okay, Piper, thanks for being my co-host. It
was my pleasure.
It was a first, and it should have happened a lot sooner, I think, because of our interactions on Twitter. It's weird that we've never been in a setting like this. But yeah, I really appreciate.
I'm not going to hold it against you.
Okay. Well, all that leaves me to say we have a word of one of our sponsors, Christian sponsors. So maybe you can enjoy that. See you all next time. Bye-bye.
Listen to this. Our visitors watched almost 18 million minutes of our videos on YouTube. I'm telling you, praise God. Can you imagine that? I want to say a big thank you to all of our YouTube subscribers and all of our partners. Now listen, if you have not subscribed to a YouTube channel, do it right now. Do it today. And all you have to do is click the big red subscribe button. Be sure to share our channel with your family and with friends, because it takes all of us working together to spread the word